Welcome to Common Grounds, a connect group of Sagemont Church in Houston, Texas. Thank you for joining us as we jump into Exodus with the Miraculous Escape. Hope you enjoy today's lesson.
We are in the book of Exodus today. We are working through Exodus chapter 16, famous passage about manna, bread from heaven. So far the Israelites have been living in slavery in Egypt for hundreds of years. God delivered them through plagues, the last plague being the death of the firstborn. Then they led them out to the Red Sea. God parted the waters of the Red Sea. They went through. The Egyptians were drowned who were pursuing them. Then they came out and were thirsty. They went 3 days without any water. And they finally found some water, but it was bitter. And they complained. They griped. And Moses took a stick, threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. And then God has them leading them through the wilderness, testing them. And one of the first things you want to notice about the passage today is that it's not supposed to be easy, right? Tests are not supposed to be easy. If you thought life was supposed to be easy, you're probably mistaken, because it's not. In fact, God designs life to test us, to grow our faith, right? And so things go wrong. Things don't happen the way we want them to all the time. And God has actually designed this so that he can grow our faith and he can test us. Now, what's happening to the Israelites is they are actually being led to God. They're being led to Sinai. They're going to be led to the mountain of God. They're going to see the power and the presence of God. They're going to get the 10 Commandments and the law of God. But before they can get there, they need to be tested along the way. And they're tested in a variety of ways. No water, no food. They get attacked by the Amalekites, and God is using all these things to show his faithfulness, to test them, to help them to learn to trust him, and they don't always do a good job. And if we're honest, we don't always do a good job in our trials either. And here's why. We live in an imperfect world, right? We live in an imperfect world with imperfect people, imperfect rules and regulations, imperfect systems, imperfect corporations, imperfect companies, and imperfect people around us, and all these things affect us, right? And they mess things up. They make things difficult, okay? But when we're going through these things, and we're dealing with all these difficult situations, we need to step back and realize that God is still sovereign over all this crazy stuff around us in the world, right? And if you can step back and realize that he's sovereign, then instead of lashing out at the person or the policies or the systems or whatever, you can step back and realize, okay, yeah, this is messed up, but God is testing me here. You can realize he's sovereign, he's in control, and I need to learn to trust him. And that's the other reason why tests are difficult, because they require faith on our part. And faith is never really easy. We have to trust what we can't see. We have to trust in God's promises for us. And we have to just keep going, walk by faith. In the wilderness, the children of Israel were supposed to be walking by faith. But when you're without food for a while, you get hangry, without water, you're thirsty, and they tend to act just like we might act in certain situations like that. Like I said, try to not feed Baptists for 3 days and see how they react. We missed lunch. Lunch is late. So here we go, chapter 16. Now they set out from Elim. Now Elim was a place that after some trials and testing, they got to rest. It had 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they got to camp there. Just kind of rest, some fresh flowing water. But you can't stay at Elim. God provides these little Elims for you along the way, but you got to move on. It would be nice to stay there. It would be nice to always be on vacation, right? Never have to go back to work on Monday. It would be nice if the weekend was 3 or 4 days every weekend. But you have to keep going in life. You have to keep moving on. So as they're moving on from Elim, they're leaving a place of water and abundance and rest, and they're going into the wilderness. So a lot of imagery here in Exodus. As they leave Elim, the congregation of the people of Israel go into the wilderness of sin. Now, this is actually not the Hebrew word for sin. It's actually probably better translated as zin. But it's kind of funny that it comes down to us in English as the wilderness of sin, because they're going to do some sinning in the wilderness. And so they go from this oasis into the wilderness. And that's sometimes where God leads us in our life. He leads us into the wilderness, through the wilderness. Jesus was led into the wilderness 40 days and fast and pray and be tempted by the devil. Okay? And sometimes God leads us into these places that are a little more difficult than the past place we've been, but you got to move on. You've got to grow, you got to be tested, and we grow probably more in the wilderness than we do at Elim. So this is between Elim and Sinai, and on the 15th day of the second month. Why did they notice that? Why did they mention that? Because it's 1 month after leaving Egypt. After they had departed from the land of Egypt, in verse 2, and the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled. It doesn't say a few people grumbled. What does it say? The whole congregation grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. Now, often churches will grumble against their pastor or their ministers. My sister's a pastor's wife. She was walking behind someone one time, and this lady, the pastor should be here. The pastor needs to be doing that. She didn't see my sister behind her. And my sister said, well, the pastor's not here because he's overdoing this. But when people grumble against their spiritual leaders, God considers that grumbling against himself. So we should be careful, when we grumble against the government or against our work or our boss or our coworkers or whatever, because these are people that God has placed in authority, and especially in the church, we want to be careful. We might not be grumbling against people or policies. We might be grumbling against God and not realize it, just like these people were. So, they grumbled against Moses and Aaron, the two leaders, and the people of Israel said to them, oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt. What? They're wishing that God had killed them? You ever been in a trial where you're just like, just take me home, Lord? Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Man, this is some pretty bad accusations here, right? First of all, they say, oh, I wish God had just killed us in Egypt. And then they romanticize their slavery. Sometimes when you're in the midst of a trial, you do kind of romanticize the past. You're like, oh, the past was so much better. It was like you forget about you forget about your slavery, right? And we tend to do that. We tend to look at the past and we think, oh, it was so good, but it really wasn't as good as we think it was. But that's what people do in trials. And they say, oh, we had meat pots, we had bread to the full. Yeah, but you're working as a slave 12, 14 hours a day. The scripture said it was bitter labor, hard labor. They didn't mention that. They forgot about that. But they're looking at their past and saying, oh, man, that was so much better back then. We had food to eat. And they don't have food. Now, remember, they probably, after a month of travel, they probably used most of their provisions. Do you remember how many people were coming out of Egypt? Between 2 and 3 million people. It's hard to feed a lot of people like that. Stop and think about it. Imagine no one could really cater this. In fact, if you just take just the food part, if you take, say each person, each adult, let's say it costs about $10 a day to eat at a minimum, and there's 2 million of them, how much is that? What, $20 million to feed them for one day? Multiply that by 365, multiply that by 40 years in the wilderness. This is a lot. They need a lot of food, right? And they're in the wilderness where there's nothing. And so they're hungry. They're out of their provisions. Now, does God want them to get to this point? Yes. Does God want them to experience this pain of hunger? Yes. Does God want them to complain about it? No. So one of the prayers we can pray is, Lord, help me to suffer well for your glory today or this week. Because you're going to suffer somewhat. And when it comes, help me to glorify you. Help me not to complain. Complainers are not a whole lot of fun to be around. And sometimes we can be that. We can jump in on the complaining at work and other places like that, even at church sometimes. So we need to watch our grumbling and complaining and remember who we're grumbling against. And then they accuse Moses and Aaron of trying to kill them. Are you trying to kill us? Did you bring us out here to kill us? I read one commentator that says, when you're in a trial, when you're in a difficult situation, you do tend to try to judge other people's motives, and you assign to them the worst motives possible. You're just doing that because of this. Oh, you doctors just care about money, or, the politics, or the corporations, or the staff members, or whatever. You assign the worst motives to people. Well, we're not supposed to be judging people's motives. That's between God and them and the heart. But you make up this thing because you're in a trial. This guy doesn't care about fixing my car. He just wants to make money off me. Charge so much. It's just, you end up, I mean, I do the same thing, but you end up judging motives when you're in the midst of, it's part of your complaining, all right? They don't care about us. They just care about money, or they care about this, or they just want recognition. So you got to watch the different forms of grumbling that can come into your life when you're facing trials and you're going through hard times. Now, it's going to be difficult. I told you. God designed it that way. About last Thursday or so, not this Thursday, but Thursday before last, everything started going wrong. It's like one thing after another. Little things, little things, little things. I'm like, okay, I'm in a little bit of a trial here. And I get sick. And then the valve breaks in my house. I can't get it fixed. I have to cut the water off to the house. Darren and I are messing with it about 9:30 at night. We're talking to the plumber at Home Depot. We break something. And like, at this point, I was like, I'm not going to sleep in my house tonight. I'm not going to work tomorrow. Ended up having to call a plumber in and all that. But it's just one of those things that just, the pains of life. Things seem to add up. And when you see one thing after the next going wrong in your life, it's not that God is punishing you. It's not that something, things are just going against you. God is testing you, right? He's testing you. He's testing your faith. And sometimes when you're in that situation, what you want to do is just like I talked about last week, be still and let the Lord fight your battle. Just be still. Don't panic. These people panicked. When they got hungry, they panicked. When they got thirsty, they panicked. We're going to die. Don't panic. You're not going to die. You keep going. You keep persevering. Keep walking. Let the Lord fight your battles. Let the Lord take care of you. Be still, okay? And just keep walking. God will work things out. I don't know how it's going to work out. That's okay. You don't need to. Right now, you just need to keep going. And God will work things out. God will provide. And sometimes things are blessings in disguise. We don't realize it. All right, so they're hungry. Verse 4, the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you." Wow. In the midst of their complaining against their leaders and against God, God could have struck them. He could have set fire to some of them. He could have sent snakes on them. He does some of that later. But at this point, he just says to them, okay, I'll feed you. He is very gracious. We serve a gracious, loving God that even when they complain, he still gives them what they need, right? Even miraculously. So we see a good Father here who puts up with us and who provides for our needs. And now God has rained different things from heaven, right? He rained down water upon the earth in the flood. He rained down water for crops. He rained down fire on Sodom and Gomorrah, burn it up. Here he's going to rain down bread, really. So we haven't seen him rain bread yet, but he does, bread from heaven. And the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may, look at the words here, look at the phrasing, test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So when they were to go out on Friday, they were to get twice as much because they were to not go out on Saturdays, the Sabbath, because there wasn't going to be any. So Moses and Aaron said to the people of Israel, "At evening you shall know it was Yahweh who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord." For who are we that you should grumble against us? And Moses said, "When the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling, that you grumble against him." I mean, who are we? You're grumbling not against us, but against Yahweh, against I am, the Lord. So God tells them, I'm going to give you bread, and he's actually giving them quail too. I'd forgotten that they got quail at the very beginning. Now, they're going to go out every day, and they're going to have to gather this stuff, okay? So it's just not like they're going to stand there and God, open your mouth, and he's going to put food in their mouth, right? This isn't fast food. There's something they have to do. First of all, they have to get up from their sleep, and they have to go out early in the morning, and they have to gather this stuff, because when the sun comes up, it melts away. So if they sleep in, they're not going to get this manna. They actually have to go do something. They have to gather it. And each person had to gather enough for themselves. So it wasn't the husband, watching football and the wife going out and getting everything for the family. Every individual had to get up and go work, gather this stuff. And it said they had to boil it or bake it. So there's something for them to do. So commentators look at this passage and they say this is a great example of what God does for us. He gives us things, but we still have some work to do, right? We have to get up in the morning. God provides for us, but we have to get up in the morning and go to work. It's difficult sometimes. We have to get out of bed and do things that we'd rather just stay in bed. He gives us salvation, but we have to work it out with fear and trembling. He gives us relationships, but you have to work at relationships. So whatever God has gifted us, it's not just like we sit back and just put the food in my mouth. Well, let me drive through the drive-through. Thank you so much. He gives them some work to do at the same time. God has given us all work to do. Work is something that we're to do for His glory. And yes, He blesses us, but it requires some effort on our part. It takes a lot of effort if you want to be holy. The scripture says, rebuke the people and said, you've not, in the New Testament said, you've not come to the point where you've shed blood in your striving against sin. So there are things for us to do. If you're lazy, you're not going to be able to get this blessing. Now, it's a daily blessing. It comes every day. On Friday, they were to get a double portion, but the rest of the week, they were to just gather for that day. And there's another great spiritual principle here, that God does give you bread from heaven, manna from heaven, spiritual manna. He will speak to you every day. He will minister to your heart. You can open the Word every day, but you got to do it every day, right? Can you have a really good quiet time on Tuesday and say, oh, I'm good for the week? Doesn't work that way, right? You may go to church Sunday, you had a great time at church, but do you have to get up Monday and pray and read the Word? Yeah, you do. You just can't live on yesterday's manna. Every day, I mean, you may have had the most awesome time with the Lord you've ever had Friday night, but you got to get up Saturday and seek Him again. It's a daily bread. It's a daily manna where you have to seek the Lord and go put some work in. Prayer, reading the Word, going to fellowship, going to Bible studies or whatever. You have to put the effort in on a daily basis because you can't live on yesterday's manna. You got to every day put the work in to seek the Lord. And like I said, I have to do that first when I come home. It has to be a first priority or it'll get drowned out. It'll get pushed out by other things. So Moses said to Aaron, say to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, come near before Yahweh as He has heard your grumbling. Oh boy, it's like getting called into the principal's office. So come near, come here. I've heard you grumbling. Grumbling is usually something that's done at a distance. It's something done not when the boss is in the room, but when the boss is not in the room. And when you're complaining about someone else, they're usually not there in front of you. Now, some people may do that, but most of the time when we complain, it's at a distance, right? It's behind people's backs, but God hears it. And God says to them, come here. Come into my presence. What are you saying? What have you been grumbling? Uh-oh, we're caught. So there's a drawing of Israel to God. It says, come near to me. I've heard your grumbling. And as soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation, the people of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the clouds. So they had this cloud that led them. And then they see the glory of the Lord in the cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am Yahweh your God. Now twice already we've seen, then you shall know that I am your God. Don't you think by now they know that? Don't you think by now they should be trusting Him? Well, I don't know about you, but for me, God does have to repeat Himself a lot. He has to tell me over and over again, don't be afraid. Whatever promises He gives you, He has to tell you over and over again. I got a friend who, man, God used him to literally work miracles, and he says he's not even a believer anymore. I mean, you have to, following Jesus is a daily thing, and our faith, we can have faith one day, we can see God work one day, and the next day we can have the exact same trial and lack faith again, because that's just our human nature. It's difficult for us. We have to have God repeat Himself to us, continually reveal Himself to us, and we're just weak. And Israel was in the same way. They had seen God work miracle after miracle after miracle, but then they still panic, and they still need faith. And He says, then you will know that I, Yahweh, am your God. And the evening quail came up and covered the camp. So the whole camp, several million people, are going to be fed with this huge flock of migrating quail. Now this is kind of interesting. I did a little research on quail, and a brother, John Morgan, had a point about quail one time when he was a hunter. He goes, quail is some of the best bird meat there is. You ever had quail? If you cook it right, it's pretty good. I've had it before out in the hill country. It's very good. And he said, God could have given them any type of bird or any type of meat or whatever, but he gave them the best. Isn't that cool? He gave them quail to eat. It's very good. Now, migrating quail, I read that when quail migrate, they can fly so far that they get exhausted. And then when they eventually will land, they're actually unable to fly for a while until they get their strength back. Well, it was kind of interesting. So that might explain, because God could do anything he wants. He could make the quail just sit there but most birds, when you try to grab them, they're going to fly off, right? If the quail come in, they may be just too exhausted to fly anymore. They're just sitting there, just pick them up. Is there still work to do? Yes, because you can't stick that whole bird and just stick it in your mouth, right? Quail nugget or whatever. You've got to pluck the feathers. You've got to grill it. You got to get the fire ready. You've got to cook it. You've got to do some work that goes with it to be able to eat. So God always wanted them to have to do something, not just to get a freebie, right? There are people in our country that want the government just to give us free stuff. That's not biblical. So in the morning, dew lay around the camp. So it's just water, dew on the ground everywhere. And when the dew had gone up, it evaporated, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. It was very thin. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat." So the dew lifts, and they look, and there's this little white flake-like thing on the ground everywhere. It's covered the ground. And they're like, "What is this? What is it?" And actually that becomes the name of it. What in Hebrew is man. It is and they put it into one word, manna. Manna means, what is it? So they took three words and made it into one. And we did the same thing, What is up? We made into what's up, right? That's what they did. What is it? They made into manna, one word. So this is the bread that they are going to eat for 40 years. And again, it requires a little work. They got to boil it or bake it. I guess you could eat it raw. I don't know. But most of them boil or bake it. They would grind it up. They pound it up, kind of make it like flour and things like that. And this is the bread that they ate for 40 years in the wilderness. This is another amazing miracle of God. This is daily bread every day. In fact, Jesus, when he's teaching one time and he fed the people and multiplied the fishes and loaves, the people came to him and said, "Hey, Moses gave us bread in the wilderness for 40 years. Can you do that?" They wanted the food more than they wanted him. And you see the prayer in the Lord's Prayer, "Give us this day our daily bread." Perhaps goes all the way back to here when God literally gave them their daily bread. I was doing some research on manna, and there was during a famine in Angola. Angola is a West African country. There was a little church in a village where they were completely out of food, and all the people, they just went to church and they just sought the Lord for 3 days, and they fasted because they didn't have any food, but they were praying and seeking the Lord. And this is a story I researched online, and I saw some people interviewed too. And on the third day, a little girl came walking in with a handful of white flaky stuff, and they saw her and they said, "Throw that down. What is that?" And they said, "Don't eat it." And she goes, "I already did." So why did you eat it? And he said, "The man told me to." She said, I found this on the ground and 2 men told me eat it. So I ate it. They're looking at it and they said, "What is it?" And they went out and it was everywhere. They believed that they got manna from the Lord. And it sustained this little village in the famine in Angola. In fact, the kicker of the story, the big part of the story, was their church got destroyed and it fell all the time. Their church got destroyed during the Civil War in Angola, and when they finally rebuilt the building and rededicated it and things like that, the next day they said the whole fields, hills, everything were covered with manna. It's terrified them. The adults were just frozen because of the power and glory of God. They were overwhelmed by this miracle. But the little children went out and got it, gathered it all up and took it into the homes. I'm just telling you what I researched, what I saw. Okay? I don't know why people would make that up. But, could God do that today? Sure. God could do whatever he wants. Especially in countries that are, our country is very self-reliant, right? It's hard for us in America to pray, "Give us today our daily bread," when we can just go to the grocery store. We got it sitting in the refrigerator at home. But in a lot of the world, they need to see God's miraculous power providing for them almost on a daily basis so they can eat. And God is certainly able to do that. He tells them, gather each one of you as much as you can eat. Now, I've got a 4-year-old nephew. He can go out and get his manna for the day. He didn't need his mom or dad to gather manna for him. He could get a little jar and fill it up. He likes to eat, so he probably have a big jar. But it was funny when each of them went out and gathered things that they got exactly what they thought they could eat for the day, and it filled them. Some gathered more, some gathered little. And Paul will use this verse later on in the New Testament. We'll talk about giving for the churches and donating to different churches in need and how God will provide through that. But God provides for them each one what they need. Okay, they're probably not going to get fat off this stuff, right? But they're going to have enough to eat. Now, what are the nutrients in it? I mean, did it pass FDA regulations for all the different? No, we don't know. We don't know what was in it. But they said it tasted sweet. Isn't that cool? God could have just given them regular bread, but it was like sweet. It tasted sweet, almost like it had, they said, a little honey in it. That's kind of cool that God did that for them. So they measured each one an omer, and when they gathered it, those who gathered had no lack. Those who gathered more had enough, and those who gathered little had no lack. And Moses said to them, don't leave any of it till morning. But some did not listen to Moses, and they left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and stank. So some people are like, you know what, I don't want to get up in the morning. Let me just save some for tomorrow. Instead of eating it, they saved it for tomorrow, and it turned nasty. And Moses was angry with them. They could never follow directions. Had a hard time following directions. Eat it all today. Don't save it till tomorrow. What do some people do? I got to test this out. Morning by morning they gathered it, each one as he could eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. So you better get out of bed and go get it, because it's going to be gone when the sun comes up and melts it. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each. And when all the leaders of the congregation came to Moses, he said to them, this is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake, and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till the morning. So they laid aside till the morning, as Moses commanded them, and it did not stink, and there were no worms in it. So here's another little miracle. If you kept it overnight, through most of the week, it would stink and get worms, but not Friday night. Friday night, if you kept it, Saturday morning, it was fine, because God wanted them to spend one day resting, not even going out and gathering stuff. So he says, eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather, but on the 7th day, which is Sabbath, there will be none. Look, y'all, we need to spend some time, some days just resting, chilling out, spending time with the Lord, reading his word, okay? Just resting our minds, resting our bodies. And the 7th day, some of the people went out together, but they found none. So there's some people that said on the Sabbath day, I'm going to go check it out, see if there's any out there. And they went out there, and there was nothing. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and laws? These people are they can't follow God's directions. See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the 6th day, he gives you bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. Now, the house of Israel called its name manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste was like wafers made with honey. And Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, so that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. And Moses said to Aaron, take a jar, put an omer of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations. And the Lord commanded Moses, as the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony to be kept. And the people of Israel ate manna 40 years till they came into a habitable land. And they ate the manna till they came to the border of Canaan. So here they are in the wilderness, several million people, God providing food for them every single day. He's just giving them food, providing for them. You look, God is gracious to us. We are his children. It says with most of these, God was not pleased and they died in the wilderness. They refused to go into the promised land. Only Caleb and Joshua have the faith and the vision to say, look, God has done all these things. He can bring us into this land. He told us to go. That's where he told us. I mean, why would you want to stay in the wilderness for 40 years wandering around? Why don't you go fight? Go do what God says. The couple things here. So I know I'm closing out here, but three little groups, all right? First of all, you've got God, his faithfulness, right? His steadfast love, his deliverance, his salvation, his provision, his putting up with a bunch of complainers, his testing of people. Then you got the leaders, Moses and Aaron, standing in between God and the people, interceding for them, but getting the brunt of a lot of the complaining. I once heard a long time ago, a pastor said, being a pastor is kind of like, the best way I can describe it is being a lightning rod. He said, it's like you're on top of the building and whatever lightning or disturbances in the atmosphere, spiritual atmosphere of your church, it strikes you and you got to diffuse it. You got to base it. That's a great description of what Moses and Aaron kind of did, because all this electricity of grumbling and complaining, they get struck with it and they gotta deal with it. They gotta base it, they gotta kill it. So here you have the leaders struggling, hurting because of all the complaining. The people are complaining at them when they really should be complaining to God, but yet Moses and Aaron intercede and they speak for God to the people. So they declare what God says to the people. And then you got the masses. You got the people being led through tough times. I mean, let's be honest. It's a tough time. It's not easy. Going without food or water for a long time, it's not easy. And remember also, these people they're slaves. So they're kind of conditioned to handouts in a way. You know what I'm saying? They've got the slave mentality that, we do work every day, but you give us food. So they almost kind of have a little bit of a slave mentality, of a handout mentality in a way. They say that people that are institutionalized, it's hard for them to get back in society and get a proper mindset toward things. So you have this massive nation of people that have been as slaves complaining, griping, seeing the power of God, but then the next time a trial comes, going right back, complaining and griping and panicking. We're going to die. We're going to starve. They probably weren't starving. They were hungry, but you don't starve until 4 or 5 weeks, 6 weeks, something like that. That's when you start really starving in a famine. But they, 1 day or 2 days without food, they were starving, or they thought they were going to starve. And so when we go through, like Israel, the trials of life, first of all, remember, call upon the Lord, pray, talk to him. That's the time you really need to call out to God. Try not to complain about things and people and situations. And then don't panic. I don't know about you, but I often panic. And don't panic. Just stay calm, trust God, be still, let the Lord fight your battles. Remember he's testing you. Remember it's not supposed to be easy. Remember he's growing you and he's leading you and he's strengthening you. So what God does with us, I believe, if you say, Lord, I want to be your servant, God, I'm yours. Use me for your glory. I belong to you. I want to know you and help make you known. Then he starts to forge a weapon for his work. That's what he's doing with you. He's forging you as a weapon for his work, for his glory. And when you go through the forge, you got to take the pounding, you got to take the heat, you got to take all the stuff. But look, God is not just taking you through the stuff to make you a stronger Christian. He's making you a stronger Christian so you can be strong for others, so that you can be strong for his glory, so that you could do things now you never could do before. You could comfort people now that you could never comfort before. So yeah, the trials have a great, great purpose. I told y'all when I was going through that really extreme anxiety and depression so bad that I couldn't even work for about 4 months. It was the worst time of my life. I mean, cancer was bad, getting leukemia, getting first diagnosed was bad, but when you have mental problems, mental issues, it's just like a whole different level. So I'm dealing with anxiety, dealing with depression, can't even work. It was horrible. It's like a nightmare. And when you're dealing with stuff like that, you get so dark and you're just trying to survive every day, right? Well, I had a friend who would call me and we would talk and he would say, man, I know you can't see it now, but God is preparing you for something great. He's preparing you and he is going to use you in a way you can't imagine. And he's forming you and he's using this time to get you ready for that. And once I came out of that, as I was coming out of that, I ran into David and Claudia. They asked me to come teach, and here y'all are. Here I am. So the Lord takes us and forms us and shapes us, and he sends us into the wilderness. He sends us away from Elam, and sometimes ministers, they're in a great church, a great situation, everything's going good, and God says, I'm calling you away. But Lord, everything's going good here. We got numbers, things are growing, everything's going good. But God says, I'm calling you over here. And they go over there, and it's a tough situation. Look, we don't get to choose our race. We get to choose, am I going to run it or not? Or really, how am I going to run it? Am I going to run it well? There'll be times where you go to Elam, and it's nice, and it's great, and there's prosperity and blessing, and everything's falling into place for you. But in my life, like if I've been like 9 months and I haven't really been through a trial, I'm like, it's been a while since I've really had something tough. I bet it's coming pretty soon. Don't like to think about it, but it's been about 9 months since I've had a tough trial. I bet this isn't going to last too much longer. And sure enough, in the next month or two, things will start to stir me up a little bit, and things will start to happen. So we're all in this together. We're all traveling this journey together, kind of like Israel in the wilderness. God is leading us eventually to himself in heaven and to the promised land. But along the way, he's going to have to test us. Now, we don't want to test God, but he gets the right to test us, right? That's what he does. So when things don't go your way, when everything seems to be going wrong, remember, God is in control. Try not to grumble. Try not to lash out. And when you do, show yourself grace, because God will show you grace. But remember what's going on. He's forging a weapon for his work. He's molding you and shaping you into someone who will give him glory. If you said to the Lord, Lord, here am I, send me, use me for your glory. He heard that prayer. But did you realize that prayer meant you were going to go through some fires, through some tough times? Maybe physical trials or financial trials or relational trials or whatever. Did you realize that was going to be part of the answer to the prayer? Lord, make me into your servant. Use me for your glory. Okay, well, this is what he has to do.
Thanks for listening. If this week's message helped you, feel free to share it with a friend. At Common Grounds, we are striving to help people grow in their faith and build community by finding common ground in Christ Jesus. Until next time, hope y'all have a great week.